If you're just joining us, I'm Claire Natola. I am the education coordinator for the Vermont Cheese Council. So also, if this is your first session of the day with us, I'll let you know that we have a chat area where you can say hello, introduce yourself if you wish, make any observations or comments during the presentation. But if you have questions for our presenters, we use the Q&A section to type those questions. So I would like to introduce Jamie Pung. Say hi, Jamie, or wave at everybody.
Hello.
Jamie is monitoring the question and answer section for this presentation. So thank you for doing that, Jamie. And so if you type your questions in the Q&A section and not in the chat section, Jamie will see those and she will present them to Christina for us. So if you have any technical problems, you'll want to email an email address that I'm about to type into the chat. And that is info@vtcheese.com. That's info@vtcheese.com. So if you have technical issues, please reach out there. Just a quick reminder that we will be recording each session and we'll have those recordings available to watch later in the Sched event platform in case you need to step away. I also want to point out that Christina has handouts for us. And if you go into the Sched platform and click on Christina's presentation and scroll down underneath the description and Christina's biography, you will see an icon for a PDF file called VCC Presentation Handouts. So we thank Christina for providing those for us. And let me go right ahead and introduce Christina. Christina Chang is a race and equity consultant based in Seattle. She leads workshops and facilitates retreats. She talks about building and sustaining an inclusive and equitable work culture. And she does this at universities, nonprofit organizations, nationwide. She is committed to helping transform institutional cultures and build systems of belonging. So thank you so much, Christina. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Claire, and thank you, Jamie. Thanks to both of you for being my co-producers today. I'm going to go ahead and share screen, and if you have access to the handouts, these should look exactly the same, so you can follow along today. Hello again, my name's Christina Chang. I use she, her pronouns. As Claire said, I'm coming to you from, I'm going to ad-lib a little bit, rainy Seattle. It's raining again. I hope that the weather is okay for you all wherever you are. I wanted to wish you a happy Black History Month, happy Year of the Dragon, and just tell you a little bit more about myself. I identify as a cis-het woman. I'm a first-generation Chinese American. As Claire said, I live, work, and play on the traditional land of the Coast Salish people, the Duwamish, today known as Seattle. And it is my lifelong commitment to help institutional cultures build systems of belonging so that everyone has the audacity to live their authentic truth, which is a really powerful quote from Dr. Brittany Cooper at Rutgers University. I'm thrilled to spend the next 45 minutes with you talking about recruiting and retaining with an equity lens. And I invite you to think about your sort of current hiring and retaining practices and how you might incorporate more equitable processes and practices, thereby creating a more equitable outcome when building an excellent team that is representative of the community, as well as retaining a team that is more engaged and more empowered. So let me just start with this really dense slide. That sort of, I'm really trying to set the stage for why diversity, why is it important? And sort of my wry response is, how much time have you got, right? There are many different reasons. One of them, very important, is demographics, right? So in 2025, which is in about 15 minutes, 10 months from now, approximately 3/4 of the workers in America will be Gen Y. So those born roughly between 1980 and 1995. Roaring right up behind them is Gen Z, those born roughly between 1995 and 2010, who they surpassed the boomer generation in the workforce most recently. So we've got Gen Y and Gen Z coming into the workforce and taking up a huge space in that workforce. And those folks expect diversity in their workforce. Only 59% of working Gen Yers are white today. Younger Gen Zers are already majority minority, majority BIPOC. And more than 1 in 5 of Gen Zers actually identify as LGBTQIA plus, in case folks didn't know this. And again, the most diverse generations coming into the workforce, and in addition, they are the most educated, the best educated generation. We really, as the workforce, need to be paying attention. These generations consistently report that DEI is a top value they look for in a new employer, in an employer. And if your workplace doesn't figure out how to align your approach to the workforce that you've got, you're going to lose talent, right? People are not going to stay. So it's really, really important. This rethink of the whole workforce was also accelerated, as you all know, by COVID, right? And by some accounts, workplace culture has accelerated as much as 50 years in the short span of the COVID pandemic. So we've really turned over what it means to be a worker in the United States, or in the world, actually, to work. Work has really, really changed. Related to demographics, diversity is the destiny of this country, and thank goodness, because our population is aging. William Fry from the Brookings Institution wrote a book in 2018 called The Diversity Explosion. And he says that the diversity boom is good news for this country because we are facing rapid aging and declining growth. In about 20 years, more than 50% of all Americans will belong to a minority group. There will be no majority group in America. We will be a majority minority population, again, in about 20 years. And many of our states, I can think of 4 right now: California, Hawaii, New Mexico. Oh, goodness. And I just forgot the last one. There are 4 states that are currently majority minority. And there are between 7 and 10 states that are already who already exceed the current population of 60% white population in the country. So they already exceed those numbers on the other side, right? So heading towards majority minority. Catherine Phillips of Columbia Business School wrote a book, wrote several books, and she wrote this really influential article called How Diversity Works. And she studied for many years the benefits of diversity in the workplace. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2020. But she found that diverse groups have better outcomes than monocultural groups. And her results are backed up by many, many others. Richard Friedman, Frank Dobbins, Iris Bonet. I mentioned all of those folks' names. And if we don't believe any of that, how about just the fact that diversity makes companies more money, right? We've got Forbes magazine weighing in, McKinsey consulting firm, the Wall Street Journal as well. None of these are exactly bastions of liberal thinking, right? And they all found that increasing diversity of leadership actually leads to better financial performance. In some cases, there's actually a linear relationship and better with better financial performance. So if diversity being valued for its own sake, which is really important, isn't convincing, that I hope that I have made the case in other ways for any skeptics out there that diversity is the wave of the future and is destiny. So I wanted to invite you all to think of an equity framework for thinking about hiring and retaining. And this is this is the framework that I used when I was at the University of Washington, actually. And so what gets in the way of recruiting equitably? From an equity lens, it's about implicit bias. We're going to sort of shine a little bit of light on implicit bias, what it is, how it manifests in your work life, how it embeds itself in your processes, and what you can do to identify it on the path to overcoming it. And then on the other side of our conversation, we will talk about the retaining part, but let's focus on hiring right now. So we all have implicit biases. How do we mitigate? What is your current process for identifying qualities and skills that you are looking for in an applicant? And how might bias be impacting your perceptions of a qualified candidate? So first of all, what is implicit bias? It is the judgment or behavior that results from subtle cognitive processes that operate on a level below our conscious awareness and below intentional control. It is a well-researched scientific phenomenon. Attitudes and stereotypes that affect how we unconsciously understand, how we act, how we make decisions, are ruled by our unconscious. And we are generally not aware of these attitudes and beliefs. And everybody carries them, right? If you have a brain, you have bias. It is a pervasive phenomenon. That's the second thing, right? It is not necessarily your fault. The emphasis here is on implicit. It happens below conscious awareness and without our intentional control. But the third thing, and the most important thing, is by being self-aware, by shining a light, by understanding, oh, okay, I might have bias here, right? And actually slowing ourselves down, increasing awareness of implicit bias can actually mitigate its effects. We have to be mindful. We have to pause. I call it the equity pause. We have to slow ourselves down. We must remain vigilant and actively resist. And we can be internally motivated to actually recognize and lessen implicit bias. Let me give you an example of implicit bias in action. This is the National Bureau of Economic Research. They responded to 1,300 ads, things like help wanted ads, things like sales, admin, clerical, customer service, right? They answered 1,300 of these in the cities of Chicago and Boston. They sent out nearly 5,000 resumes. And all of these resumes were similar, right? They had similar skills and experience. The only real difference was that the names on the top of the resumes read Greg Baker and Emily Walsh, typically white-sounding names. And then they sent out resumes, the same resumes, right? That read Jamal Jackson and Lakeisha Washington at the top, typically black-sounding names. And then they waited to see what would happen. And what they found was that the resumes with the white-sounding names got 50% more callbacks. There are three practical realities to that finding, right? First, that job applicants with white names needed to send out 10 resumes to get one callback versus those with African-American sounding names needed to send 15 resumes to get one callback. So that callback rate imputes giving 8 extra years of experience to those white-sounding named resumes than actually existed. Because remember, they were all the same. All the resumes were essentially the same. Race was also found to affect the reward of having a better resume. So what they found was that the higher quality resumes from white-sounding candidates got 30% more callbacks than white-sounding names with lower quality resumes. But the positive impact of a better resume for those with African-American sounding names was not as great as 30%. It was much smaller. So this survey, this research also mirrors a different survey that was conducted in New York, where resumes of white-sounding names with criminal records got more callbacks than black-sounding names with no criminal records. So this effect is real, is what the National Bureau of Economic Research found. And I'm just going to sort of go out on a limb here, but I'm sure that any one of those 1,300 job ads, if we were to poll them and ask them, hey, why did you pick Greg Baker versus Jamal Jackson? None of them, or hopefully very few of them, would have actually been aware that they were placing bias on their decision-making, because again, most of this implicit bias is below conscious awareness, right? So what are the common biases we have when we're recruiting? Many of you probably have heard of some of these biases. So first, confirmation bias. We are primed to see and agree with ideas that fit our preconceptions, right? And then confirmation bias also causes us to ignore and dismiss other information that conflicts with the picture that we want to see, right? So when you are recruiting, that's when we maybe sort of cherry pick data to support our intuition. So if the candidate before us is the son or daughter of a friend, right, we might decide, well, they didn't answer that question really well, but they went to the school that I went to. They went to Amherst, so they're going to be all right. And we ignore the things that we don't that the information that conflicts with the picture that we want to have in our heads, right? So we cherry pick data to support our innate beliefs about a candidate when hiring. Anchoring is the first thing that we judge, influences our judgment. So we are associative in nature. That's how our brains are constructed. So the order in which we receive information is also important to determine the course of our judgments and perceptions. So we want to be especially mindful of this bias when interviewing, when we, for instance, meet the first candidate, right? And then we tend to judge everyone thereafter on that first candidate. I had a client who shared with me that they used to be in a marching band, and they would always they never wanted to be in a certain position. They always try to position themselves right in the middle or right at the beginning. I don't remember which placement they liked, but they knew that the placement was a really, really important determiner of how they were going to be judged. In-group bias, insider bias. So this is when we unfairly favor those who belong in our group, and it actually is quite related to confirmation bias, right? This is when we presume we are fair and impartial, but the fact is we tend to favor candidates who look like us, who maybe are from the same region, maybe the same ethnic group, maybe, as I mentioned, from the same university, right? Or from the same high school. We automatically favor those who are most like us or belong in our groups. So when we are going to recruit, try to imagine ourselves in the position of those outgroups, right? While also attempt to be as dispassionate as possible when judging those who belong in our group, right? So groupthink. Dissent can be really uncomfortable, right? And so often we let the social dynamics of the group, which means harmony. We don't want to disrupt harmony, right? We don't want to have the social dynamics of the group override the best outcomes ever. So even if dissent can be uncomfortable, we need to facilitate objective ways to evaluate and objective critical thinking practices, especially when we're in a group, right? Trying to determine group decisions and not let sort of the most confident or the first voice determine group decisions, right? And then finally, halo and horns effect. So how much we like someone, how attractive they are, tends to influence our judgments about them. So one thing that you might think about as you are concluding your hiring process, and if you notice that you're giving consistently high marks across the board to one candidate, or if you're consistently giving low marks across the board, it's worth considering whether your judgment may be actually suffering from the halo horns effect, right? Okay. I'm kind of moving along really quickly here. I want to make sure that there are no questions or comments that I should be addressing. Jamie, was there?
Nope.
No? Okay, great. There's a lot of information, I understand. So here's some strategies for more equitable hiring. So I chunked these in three buckets. So the pre-work before the interview, other considerations and actual actions that you might take. So what you want to do in your job requirements is to enhance the readability of it. So make sure that it's just not too long, right? And purge gendered language. There's so much research showing that there are words that socially, culturally, and historically carry stereotypical weight towards a particular gender. So I'm thinking about words like nurturing or competitive, or even the word rock star, right, is very gendered. Connection is gendered. Decisive is gendered. Dominant, cooperative, empathetic, logical, right? use gender decoder software that's out there. There's one called totaljobs.com, which is free, or textio.com, which is for a fee. So again, totaljobs.com is a free gender decoder software. You want to make sure that you're eliminating unnecessary education or skill requirements. Be realistic about minimum qualifications, right? I was in a long-time job where in fundraising where many of our fundraising positions said advanced degree required. And when I actually sat down with the hiring manager and asked them, why is an advanced degree required? They actually couldn't come up with a reason, right? And so we were able to eliminate that requirement, right? Think about your requirements. Other questions you might be asking yourself as you begin to put together the interview is what skills or perspectives that are we lacking on our team, right? And maybe we could fill those gaps, right? Over in the action side, I talk about culture add versus culture fit, and that is what this is about as well, right? Think about culture add. What are the gaps that we can fill versus culture fit, meaning this person looks exactly like me. So in terms of culture, there's no learning curve, right? Ask yourself, is that what we really need here, right? So other considerations. How do we ensure that we bring diverse backgrounds and perspectives and experience to the interview process, right? Are we ready to ask some diversity questions in our interview, right? Which indicates to the interviewee that this is an organization that cares about that, right? Why is diversity important to you? That might be a diversity question. What does diversity mean to you? That's another good diversity question that's very open-ended, right? Or even something like describe a time when diversity played a part in your career or your position, right? What is the most challenging part of working in a diverse environment? What contributions have you made to promote a multicultural, diverse, inclusive environment? All of those questions would qualify, right? And then on the other side, on the flip side, be ready to answer diversity questions. So you actually have to do your homework and be able to answer the same questions that you're asking, right, of the interviewee. You might want to consider other ways to reduce barriers during that visit or working interview to make sure that it's the most welcoming and inclusive, right? So one of the actions that I would recommend is perhaps providing the questions or the tasks that you're going to be asking them to do, perhaps providing those ahead of time, right? And this would really help candidates who are neurodiverse, those who have visible or invisible disabilities, those who just don't show up at their best during that, whatever, 1, 2, 3 hour interview, right? There might even be language barriers, class background barriers, right? So find ways to reduce the barriers so that everyone has a sort of a fighting chance, right? And then on the action side, think about when there are two equally qualified candidates, as I mentioned, consider the one who adds perspective, right? Rather than fits with the existing perspective. I also recommend building in just-in-time training that invites courageous conversations. So I highly recommend that everyone, once they get off this call, go visit the website projectimplicit.net, where it's an assessment that can actually measure your bias, right? And nobody needs to know your scores. That's between you and you. But you might consider, as you take these tests, how you approached it. What was your reaction? Why did you react the way that you did? Did anything surprise you? What did you learn, right? And then remind yourself the 3 things to know about implicit bias, which was the 3 slides back, which you have a copy of. Hold yourself accountable when you notice actions that could be deemed as bias, right? And the most important thing is you must be vigilant and slow yourself down, right? We tend to make hasty decisions when we are stressed, when we're tired. So in those cases, we especially need to be mindful that implicit bias might be at play here. So I've got to actually slow myself down, right? One last thing that I just wanted to share with you. 88% of Gen Zers, when asked, say that they expect to be asked about their pronouns, right? But 67% of Gen Z's job seekers are put off by employers that don't have the courtesy of asking for preferred pronouns. So that's 88% expect it. 67% say that they would seriously reconsider working in a place that doesn't ask for their pronouns. And a paltry 12% of Gen Zers responded that they were asked for their pronouns. So it's a really easy thing to do, right? And the first thing to do is to actually introduce yourself with your own pronouns. And again, all of these ideas, all of these actions indicate an organization that is open and is moving towards inclusion. Okay, let's go to the other half of that equity framework. So in order to retain SMART, we need to recognize the existence of microaggressions. And what are microaggressions? There's a history here, so I just put the history, but we're just going to talk about the Dr. Sue's definition. So although it was first defined in 1970 by Harvard Medical School's Dr. Chester Pierce, it was popularized by Dr. Sue of Columbia, who defines it as sort of the brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative messages toward a marginalized group, individual, or community. They are subtle expressions of racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism that are commonly heard today. They are often unintentional, but nevertheless triggers an emotional reaction from the person to which it was directed. They are micro. Dr. Pierce made up the word, right, microaggressions, and he said they're micro because they often happen in small, private situations, but their effects are anything but micro. And you can read Dr. Kendi's definition at the bottom there. So what are some impactful micro affirmations that we can take at work, right? Microaggressions matter, but micro affirmations work against these microaggressions at work, right? And these are sort of ways that we can affirm someone's identity, recognize and validate their experience, build confidence, develop trust, foster belonging, right? Support somebody in their career. So first, I talked about this already, but mirror the language that someone uses to describe their own identity. So although the very fast changing rules about the right words, right, to use around identity and identity markers seems confusing, but there's an easy solution, right? And that is talk about people the way they talk about themselves, right? Listen and learn about how someone pronounces their name. Listen and learn how someone describes their identity. Listen and learn how they use their pronouns, how they identify, right? And then mirror that language they use to describe themselves, because it shows that you are paying attention and that you care about them, right? Acknowledge important holidays and milestones, right? Not everyone in your space, workspace, may celebrate the same holidays as you, or tick through the same milestones, right? But everyone you work with deserves to have occasions in their lives recognized, right, by their leaders. So, keep an eye out for key moments that might be important in someone's life and recognize them. You might wish them a happy Diwali, right, if they celebrate it. Juneteenth, Ramadan, Lunar New Year, right? It's the year of the dragon, just last weekend, right? Ramadan, Yom Kippur, Pride Month. There's so many of these examples of relevant occasions, right? So pay attention, notice. Recognition, don't forget recognition. Well-being, right? We can describe well-being as basic needs being met, right? But basic needs includes something like, does everyone have a restroom that they can enter comfortably? Are workplaces accessible to disabled and non-disabled staff and employees alike? Are there lactation stations available to lactating people? Are there private rooms where someone could take a private call if they needed to, or take a breath if they needed to, right? How might we model well-being at work? Can we make sure that we send messages, regular messages to employees that this matters, right? So don't forget recognition. And the most important thing about recognition is ask folks, how do you like to be recognized, right? Because this isn't about the golden rule, right? The golden rule is do unto others as you would have done unto you. Turns out we were misled. It's about the platinum rule. And the platinum rule says, do unto others as they want to be done unto them. If you don't if you do recognition the way you like to be recognized, it could be the worst possible thing for someone perhaps who is a introvert, let's say, right? So I'm a person who loves to be feted, and I love to be sort of, um uh brought up on stage, right? And my colleague may hate that. So we have to ask, right? We need to, again, apply the platinum rule. Do unto others as they want to have done unto them. And the way we do that is to ask them, what are your needs? How do you like to be recognized? Do you just want a quiet pat on the back? How often do you like to be recognized? What is your favorite snack, right? Maybe just throw them a pack of M&Ms every once in a while. So again, recognition, don't forget recognition. Notice. I talk about this word a lot, right? Notice when someone isn't participating. Take notice, right? Invite people, particularly folks who aren't who aren't raging extroverts, right? Invite them to speak and to share their expertise. And I also like to think I invite you to think about auditing the spaces that you walk into. For those of us who are dominant culture folks, and by that I mean cis white straight men, right? This might be something that you've never done before, audit the space you walk into. But I can guarantee you that anyone who identifies as a minoritized person in any space, they're constantly auditing the spaces they walk into, right? So I invite everybody to actually practice that exercise. Audit the spaces you walk into and you talk into. Who is literally and proverbially in the middle, and who is on the edges, right? And remember the acronym WAIT. Why am I talking, right? Perhaps you could cede the floor to someone who doesn't always speak, right? The opposite also applies for those of us who don't tend to speak. Why aren't I talking, right? So remember that acronym WAIT. Intent versus impact. It's such an important tool. Understand that you may not have intended to offend anybody or hurt anybody's feelings, but that your impact is what matters more, right? So really just a really important sort of recognition tool. So I'm just going to end here. I'm at 10 minutes, and I wanted to just let you know that these are all of the books and the resources that I used to put this presentation together, and I encourage you to check them out. And here are some further resources. And I'm going to stop now at 8:50 and ask if there are any questions.
Christina, you are so on top of it that you beat me to my 10-minute warning. You probably didn't see it because it was in the chat window, but I said I realize how much I end up taking for granted by not actively noticing what others are experiencing.
Thank you.
Christina, so
Yes.
I have a couple of questions. So one is going back to that resume study that you mentioned near the start of your talk. Did they only use white sounding names and African American sounding names, or were there other ethnicities included?
There were no other ethnicities included in this particular survey, but there have been other surveys, Jamie, thank you for bringing this up, that show that many folks with not typically Christian sounding names, right, will actually convert their names to white sounding names on their resumes so that they seem less ethnic, right? So I'll give you an example. So I have a friend whose name is Sue in Chinese, but as soon as she got to this country, she changed it to Shirley because she was told so many times, oh, I can't pronounce that. What? You know, and they would mispronounce it. And so she just changed her name. She's not, her passport does not show that her name is Shirley, but she just changed it to Shirley. So that's the kind of thing that that is absolutely backed up by research, that a lot of folks who come from different cultures, right, that are not white cultures, often adapt to white culture. I had a friend who actually on her resume, she said, love hiking, right? And I said, oh my gosh, Amy, I didn't know you liked hiking. And she goes, oh, I hate hiking. I just put it on there because I figured white people would respond better to that resume. Right. And that is borne out by the research. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, as a person who hates hiking, who lived in Vermont, I very much, yeah. Okay, another question. For the implicit bias test, is there a link that we can go to do the test?
Yes. Yes. Where is that? Where did I put that?
By the way, Christina, while you're looking for that, I
Yeah.
was off by 15 minutes. You have until quarter after.
Oh, great. Okay.
Thought
So
it had
under,
gone a little
yeah,
quickly.
that's great. Hopefully we can really dive in. So under actions, you'll see under the IAT, it's called the implicit association test. Can you see that? It's projectimplicit.net. So projectimplicit.net is the web address that you want to go to take those assessments. There are 14 different tests. This in real life research project has been going for almost 25 years, and they've collected over 20 million data points. And there are some really interesting findings, right, that show that we clearly have preferences, and we clearly have implicit stereotypes embedded. And so, yeah, these things are important to know, yeah, about yourself. Any other questions?
Yeah, do you have a list of common onboarding questions that you can recommend that people ask when bringing in new team members to help set them up and you for success?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I will ask you to do, if you have specific questions like that, is to email me at czwchang@gmail.com. It's actually at the front of the top of the presentation. Just email me and I will send some to you. But if you would like to look on the internet, I recommend Gallup, the Gallup Corporation, Gallup.com. The Gallup poll has been measuring engagement for almost 60 years, and they're the best at it. And they have reduced the questions that they ask to measure engagement to 12, because they have scientifically determined every single word on that survey. And so based on these 12 questions, they can determine whether a culture is actively engaged, disengaged, or actively disengaged, right? And their data on the state of the American workforce is pretty grim. Something like 12% of the workforce is actively engaged. But there are markers for engagement. And one of the things that they do is they talk about regular feedback, regular touch-ins, right? That a manager can make with an employee. And so one of the things that that I recommend is that you take those 12 questions and you just repurpose them for your own needs, right? And it's a great way to onboard people. The thing about onboarding that I think is sort of the magic part of onboarding is if you answer the questions alongside your new employee, right? So if you ask your employee, for instance, as an onboarding question, how do you like to receive feedback, right? You might also turn around and say, this is the way I like to receive feedback, right? And so it's not just a one-way kind of an onboarding, but it's actually a two-way, right? Two-way onboarding, which is so, so important because this is a relationship, right? It's a partnership of sorts. So it's really important for the new person to know about what your preferences are, right? Again, I'm sort of applying the platinum rule here. The only way to get to know somebody is to actually get to know them. There are no shortcuts here, right? You have to create, you have to build authentic, cross-racial, cross-generational, cross-class relationships with people, right? It's one person at a time. Again, there are no shortcuts.
Do you have activity resources that you can suggest for teams to integrate more inclusion into team building, especially for folks without big budgets?
Activity resources. So you're talking about sort of just team building exercises?
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. I mean, again, Google is so awesome, right? For that reason, we can Google anything we want. But sort of my favorite team building exercises have to do with everyday decisions that we're making, right? That we can bring the groups into. So facilitation becomes really important to facilitate conversations that can be generative, right? I really love liberating structures as a set of tools that you can use to get everybody involved and to feel like everybody's opinion matters. So go to liberatingstructures.com. That's just one word, liberatingstructures.com. And there are a set of like 34 techniques that you can use to become a more generative facilitator, if that makes sense. I hope that helped.
Christina, would we be able to get a list of links from you that we could put in a document and then stick on the SCED website so that
Oh,
people
sure.
can
Yeah,
that later?
absolutely. So I've got Project Implicit, I've got Gallup so far, and I've got Liberating Structures. Yeah.
Okay.
What else?
So, and this is a very particular artisan cheesemaker situation. For those
Yeah.
of us that are very small operations, i.e., no employees or very few employees who are seasonal, do you have any suggestions of how we could possibly still have an impact on the future of the workforce, aside from just encouraging others to adopt practices?
How much time have you got? I mean, that is a huge question, isn't it?
We have 16 minutes, so
That's so
go
funny.
for it.
So in all of the workshops that I do, and they really do vary, right? So I might have a 3-year contract with a university, or a 50-minute presentation with an organization like you, right? So I the continuum is huge, but one thing is sort of very common, and I will include this question as sort of the one of the commonalities. I always get asked the question, what do I do? Right? What can I do? And so I think that's kind of what you're asking. I mean, you're asking more than that, but you are kind of asking that. So the way that I want to answer that is, first of all, understand that even though we feel like we are one person, and therefore how much change can I really make, right? This is a systemic problem, and it's just not going to be solved by me alone, right? I understand that instinct, and I want to remind all of us, that we make up the system, right? Each one of us makes up the system. And so in that sense, individual transformation and individual work is an act of anti-racism, is an act of anti-sexism, is an act of anti-homophobism, right? So I want to say that. So don't despair. We can't despair, right? The second thing I want to say is that if there's just one thing that you take away from this session, or if I ever have the honor of being with you again, any other session, right, is that if somebody ever comes up to you, shares with you, admits to you that they've been hurt by whatever, by something, first of all, recognize the privilege that they trust you enough to tell you that, first of all, right? So recognize that, acknowledge it. And the second thing is believe them. Believe them. If they tell you they've been hurt, believe them. And what that entails is actually you doing work, right? Self-work, right? Okay, how do they're telling me that they've been hurt, possibly by me, right? So how do I receive that? And how do I mitigate? And how do I work on how never to do that again, right? Or to do less of it. Yeah. So that's my answer. And again, you have my email, so if you'd like to, I'm happy to continue the conversation. Yes. Anyone else?
So there's a question about, so in the context of small artisan operations, often people get invited to interview, and it's a working interview where they get to interact with other employees on the farm, working alongside them, or just in an interview situation. And so how would you prep your other employees to kind of interact with them in an equitable way or a welcoming way?
So you're saying because it's a working interview instead of sort of a conventional Zoom interview or meeting interview. Well, I actually think that you have a much better opportunity to to show who you really are, right, as an organization, because you're actually bringing the interviewee directly into the space, and you're doing the work, right? I often remind folks that sort of conventional interview processes they're not real, they're fake, right? I mean, sort of propping up a person in a room and peppering them with questions and seeing how well deftly they can sort of parry all the questions, right? It's literally like a gauntlet. And and many of us approach interviews like a gotcha situation, right? So if they don't answer the interview question, you put a big X on their application, and they're like, hey, and you're like, you didn't answer that question. So it's like this game, right, where you're just trying to play gotcha, as I mentioned, right? So I really, really love that you're actually bringing the person into the space, and you're actually letting them do their thing, right? They don't have to, I feel like there can't possibly be any sort of showboating, or, I mean, you either know how to do it or you don't know how to do it. You either know how to identify the cheese or you don't know how to identify the cheese, right? So it makes it much, much clearer, right? So you're actually, I feel like that's a much fairer process, just in general. I don't know if I answered that question, but you have an opportunity to really to sort of work on who you are authentically, just, you know, because you're in the shop or you're in the space, right? And you're actually doing the work and you're watching this person interact with possibly clients, right? Or other suppliers or other customers. So so it feels much more authentic already. So yeah, I don't know
Now
if that
I
answers
will
the question. Yes.
now I will gently insert the 10-minute warning.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire.
So what are the most common questions you get asked to help teams?
Yeah, the most common question I get asked is, what do I do? Right? So I've kind of decided to sort of package that question up into a packaged answer, right? Which is not adequate, obviously. There's lots of things. So many times I audit the organization, right? I do a sort of a landscape analysis before I talk about what their needs might be and how they might actually fill the gaps, particularly overwhelmingly white organizations, right? Yeah. So, yeah. Does that answer the question?
Okay, so here's a good one. How do we balance hiring local people versus reaching into employee markets that are farther away to bring more diversity into the fold? Many of us are in homogenous rural communities.
Yeah. Yeah. There's this really cool data visualization website called visualcapitalist.com. I will also put that in the little list that I'm sending you. So, and what they did with the census in 2019 was they actually mapped it. They mapped how diverse each state was. And the 3 states right in the northeast corner, right, are the numbers are so similar that I'm not going to get it right, but it's like 93, 94, 92% white, right? And William Fry of the Brookings Institution, kind of, he does some projections, and particularly in the Northeast and some parts of the Midwest are not projected to change at all. They're going to stay pretty white. So yeah, what do you do? What I'm going to say is that there are still communities in your state that are not white. There are non-white people everywhere, right? And so how do you actually take care of the needs of those people, right? First, right? How do you reach into those communities to see how you might bring those communities more into the spaces that you don't necessarily see them in today, right? Because they're there. They might not be huge, but they're there. So I think my advice is always, stay local and don't think that there's nobody there, because there are people of color everywhere, right? Yeah. So that would be my.
So how can a quieter person respond to folks on their team actively trying to shut down the use of language or acknowledgement of the importance of diversity? So if you're on a team,
Yeah.
do you have any advice for, how you can try and
How can
talk
a
other
quieter
folks around?
person respond to folks in the group actively trying to shut down the use of language or acknowledgement? Okay. So well, there's so many ways to answer that. So okay. I often get questions about something about questions related to the question you just asked, Jamie, about, how do I respond to people who are telling me that this is not a problem, or that that wokeism is bad, or the backlash that we're all that most of us know about. How do we respond to this backlash? And I have sort of a question, an answer that I have thought of because I've been thinking about it, right, most of my career, because I have been I have been on that other side, right, being shut down. And so let me answer it this way. I have a metaphor that I use, and it's the train, right? So this DEI train has left the station. Those of us who think it's important, who know it's important, who know that that is the wave of the future, that is where the train is going. We are becoming more and more diverse, whether you like it or not, right? That reality, that train that has left the station is being, I'm at the front of that train shoveling the more coal into the train. It's not a solar train yet, unfortunately. So I'm shoveling and I'm going, we got to go faster. We got to go faster. And there are lots of people in that engine with me, right? Wanting to move this train faster, right? But also on this train are people who are just passengers, right? If you think about the bell curve, right? 10 of us are really, really active. The majority of us, 80% of us are just spectators, right? Or they're waiting. They're just sitting on the train going, okay, I think I'm on board, but I'm just going to sit and wait and see, right? So there are lots of people like that, right? Who need to be challenged, right? But who are willing to hear, willing to listen. And then there's a very, very small minority, right? 10% on the other side of the bell curve who are actively resisting, right? Actively saying this, there's no such thing. Reverse racism, right? Making all kinds of outlandish claims, right? Those are the people who are on the platform, on the train platform, pretending that the train hasn't come yet, or that's not a train they want to get on, right? And what I find is that all of the people who are on the train, especially the people on the engine, right? They keep looking back at the platform and wanting to deal with those very few people on the platform without recognizing that there are tons of people on the train that we want to, definitively bring, forward, right, into the forward cabs and not just on the caboose hanging off going, I don't know, I'm not sure, I'm just going to sit here and see, right? So that's what I want to focus on. The people who actually care about being on the train, the people who know that this work is important and want to know more, right? Those are the people I want to focus on. And here's the thing, I'm not forgetting about the people on the platform because the fact is the train's not moving very fast. And anytime those people on the platform want to get up on the train, we're going to help them up there, right? Because they can, do a little sprint and we will help them get up there. But we cannot worry so much about the few people on the platform when we've got a trainload of people who think that this work might be worthy, right? So that's how I'm going to answer that. And then I will also invoke Robin DiAngelo, who wrote some really, really good books. I highly recommend Robin DiAngelo. She says, when someone asks me, how do I respond to someone's racism? I say back to them, well, how would I respond to your racism? How would you like me to respond to your racism, right? So it's this kind of looking in the mirror, right? And figuring out, what do I have to do to move this conversation forward? And not worry about other people who may be trying to sabotage, right, the progress that we're trying to make. What do I need to do, right? So self-awareness first.
And I have
Oh,
something to contribute in response to the question earlier about how to reach out to communities further away from your local community, which is, your website. Your website is a great place to demonstrate that you care about diversity. So, for example, a diversity statement on your website, people all over the world can see that. If you, on your About You page, put your pronouns after your name, or like the people on your team, pronouns. And I know some of you are already doing that, and that's great. So website, definitely.
I love that, Jamie. Thank you. Great answer.
Thank you, Jamie. And Christina, thank you so much. This was a fantastic session that gave us a lot to think about. So,
Thank you so much.
all right. Well, we are going to take a break for lunch. We will reconvene at 1:45 Eastern Time for Carrie Collegian's presentation on food safety and affinage. So everyone, please enjoy your break and we'll see you later on. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.